Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna. In Kaimere's prehistory, the Tyrant Dynasty was the most recent, prolonged era without harvest. This age may have been best known for the Tyrannosaur apex predators, but the reality is that top predators are extremely vulnerable to the context in which they are specialized. Without abundant large game, giant predators will quickly go extinct. The tyrants may have been called king, but their strength and stability was built on the backs of their prey, and for all their might, the moment the real backbone of their dynasty broke, the tyrant kings disappeared. This foundation was the Hadrosaurs. The most famous genus of this dominant hadrosaur clade was Agricolasaurus, which thrived across Nekar and Hyrule, with several species spanning from 28 million years ago all the way to the dynastic extinction 15 million years ago. These hadrosaurs were specialized to the good times, requiring a tremendous amount of food to support their vast nesting colonies so as not to deplete local resources. In this sense, it would be fair to say it was not the hadrosaurs that made this stability any more than the tyrants, as the hadrosaur colonies were so expensive that they could only exist in such a productive climate. Regardless, their dominance was unquestionable, with Agricolasaurus congregating and sustaining forests and lakes with vast wetlands, while other herbivores such as titanosaurs, ceratopsians, ankylosaurs, various large theropods, and a few ungulates that managed to integrate were all in the margins of hadrosaur territories. As one might expect, dominating the good times made hadrosaurs increasingly competitive, and there were few hardy and adaptive generalists within their clade by the end of the dynasty. With intense volcanism and flood basalt ravaging the planet, hadrosaurs were among the first to perish in the dynastic extinction. In the wake of their demise, once the planet recovered, it was the small Thescelosaurs which grew large and took up their mantle as the most diverse large herbivores, as we will cover next week. It was only a few decades ago that the assembly surveys of equatorial Nekar discovered that at least one hadrosaur survived the extinction of their clade. The Gurkan, meaning buffalo drake in the common tongue, is a fairly large herbivore in these prairies north of the known world. They live in small herds as the grass upon which they survive is too sparse to sustain large numbers. Formidable batteries of teeth help them process the whole plant, while they fully uproot before consumption. This may not be good for plant regrowth, as mammal herbivores are much more sustainable grazers and allow the plant to recover, but this strategy is why few mammals share their habitat. There's not much left once the Gurkan have had their fill. They almost entirely subsist on housey grass, leading to the proposal that they likely come from Hyrule and cross to Nekar with the spread of the grass. However, no Hyrulean relatives have been documented. It may simply be that they are so good at processing food that they have made do, though it must be said that Hyrule is poorly studied, especially in its interior, so a Hyrulean origin and living relatives can't be ruled out. The specifics of their phylogeny are currently unknown. Their skull shows similarities to Cretosaurs, suggesting an ancestry taken from the Campanian North American harvests and survived the arid period which was the prelude to the Tyrant Dynasty. This would theoretically make them not so much a relic of the era, instead being from an earlier Cretaceous shorter dynasty. However, their forelimb anatomy is much more similar to the Edmontosaurini, which were the dominant herbivores of the dynasty, such as Agricolasaurus. Regardless of these specifics, their ancestor likely survived the dynastic extinction due to being adapted to the fringes, so were less vulnerable when the good times ended. Most modern assembly paleontologists assume they are a branch of the Edmontosaurians, making them relics of the ruling dynasty, but it is still a debated topic. The equatorial regions in which the Gurkan is most abundant is an extremely hot and arid climate. Temperatures regularly get above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Most animals capable of surviving in these deserts are specialists. Water is scarce. The only sources are spring-fed rivers occasionally bolstered by storms, and even these can dry out. The region is only spared from being a rolling dune sea thanks to the root system of housy grass holding it all together. It is incredibly rare for storms to make it over the silverback mountains that trap most humidity from the Ushalek jungle. Even though Gurkan range extends to the foothills of these mountains, and the prolific jungles are close enough to smell, any storm that makes it over is quickly consumed by the housy grass. The Gurkan has a number of heat-shedding adaptations. Perhaps the most notable is the enormous display structure on the head of males. It is thin and packed with blood vessels that cool down and circulate throughout the head. They also have a dewlap to further reduce their surface-to-mass ratio. The smaller females don't have need for such specializations, but still find ways to shed heat. Both sexes have extremely thin skin with hollow scales. As wind travels over the scales, it cools down the air pockets, which in turn cool the blood. Their sinuses are very broad, helping to cool inhaled air. Their caloric demands of such low-nutrient flora means that they must feed throughout the heat of the day, but they are also so specialized to shed heat through skin and sinus that they often proceed with little difficulty. It is actually at night, when the temperature drops, that they struggle and must keep close to stay warm. The temperatures get lowest during the winter nights, which may not be dramatically different, but they often forego feeding in the nights so as to huddle together and conserve warmth. While some predators in the more verdant southern prairies can be found up north, such as Uktan and Harkundi, the most frequent predator of Gurkan is the taro. These theropods are quite rare in the known world, being largely outcompeted by young Uktan, though in regions like the northern prairies that don't have the resources to support many adults, taro are in far greater abundance. Like Uktan, the feathers of the taro are broad and actually keep them cool rather than insulating warmth, thanks to adding shade to their skin. Like their prey, the enormous sinuses not only trap moisture, but also acts as an air conditioning system to keep the brain from overheating. Even with all these adaptations, taro must still spend most of their days in whatever shade that they can find, and accomplish most of their hunting at night, where sharper night vision than the Uktan enables them to avoid strenuous activity under the midday sun. The herds of Gurkan are enough to deter most predation, but if they are caught alone, they are still quite formidable. Unlike most of their ancestors, which walked on all fours and ran on two legs, the Gurkan is very front-heavy. This makes them not only more stable on their feet, and capable of a slightly faster galloping run, it also enables a very robust forelimb that they can use to escape, if not an option. The hooves on each foot are long and sharp due to the sand and generally soft soil they walk on not wearing them down. They also have a long spur on each thumb. Both sexes have these armaments, and while they use them on each other more than against predators, it can be a useful tool for dispatching predators they trample underfoot. They are substantially larger than adult taro, so if they evade or throw off the initial attack, they can usually chase the megarans off. Uktan, unfortunately, are faster and they can run for much longer, and also far larger, so a kill is easy. But fortunately for the Gurkan, there's not enough game to support the vast resources needed for a full Uktan family, so while they may have a few subadult Uktan now and then to fear, Uktan almost never settle down and establish a territory in equatorial deserts, so the Gurkan is usually safe. In order to maximize the potential nutrients of such low-nutrient grasses, Gurkan must constantly eat, and as hindgut fermenters, their dung is actually still quite nutritious. For their first few months, juveniles subsist almost entirely on this dung until they are large enough to process the grass. Adults will also practice caprophagy to make the most of their meals. In this, one of Kaimere's hottest and least forgiving environments, a relic of a lost age is by far the most abundant and successful large animal. Their herds wander the desert prairie, adding a droning song to an otherwise silent wasteland. The dynasty of the Hadrosaurs may have ended, and other dinosaurs and mammals taken their thrones, but in this harsh territory, the Gurkan persists as the true kings of this desolate world. Cheers to Olophus for sponsoring this episode. It's a creature I quite like, and gave me a chance to showcase the diversity of the Hausie Prairie, which I know can seem a bit conformed in broad strokes. In reality, there's a pretty dynamic range of mosaic forest, desert, river, floodplains, and other regions. This was a chance to talk about the equatorial prairies, far north of the known world, a chance I don't often get as the project naturally focuses on the regions settled by people. Next week we will get an overview of the animals which assumed the mantle after the fall of the Hadrosaurs, the Thescelosaurs. The Thescelosaurs in our own history remained fairly small, yet successful generalists in the shadows of giants, with many species being proficient burrowers. This suite of traits primed them for an adaptive radiation once the megafaunal niches were rendered vacant. Thanks again to Olophus, to my Patreon patrons for your support, and thank you so much for watching. Cheers, folks!